Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. We continue our Legend series with this one with Bill Liscomb. And as we did with the Malcolm Jones show previously, Tom Pagini graciously offered to be the interviewer for this one again because he was there with Bill back in the day and back in the early 70s through this whole incredible journey you're going to hear some of. Of course, it would take us days to get the entire journey, but Bill was the mastermind behind the incredible documentary film, The Big Blue Sky. It's incredible that they had footage from back in those days, from the very first beginnings of hang gliding on all kinds of crazy contraptions to sort of fly back in the early 70s. And the film is amazing. It took him 5 years to put together. His mother was a very famous photographer. They've got a lot of the stills shots over the ages, many covers of hang gliding magazines around the world. But you're going to hear a lot of names in this one. Otto Lilienthal and Bill Bennett, Dave Kilborn, Barry Palmer, Joe Faust, John Dickinson, Richard Miller, Terrace Kasaniak Jr. and Sr., Jack Lambie and his brother Mark Lambie, Dave Cronk, Danita Hall, the Wills brothers, of course, Peter Brock, Lloyd Licker, Valmer Jansen, Bob Tampano, Roy Haggard, Tom Price, Anthony Matthews, and many, many more. This is really a walk back in time, and as I've said many times, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and Bill was certainly one of them. A lot of fascinating subjects here and great stories. And again, if you haven't seen the film, you must. The link is up in the show notes. The Big Blue Sky. It'll leave you smiling. It's an incredible documentary. It was a real work of passion for Bill, and we're all very thankful for him putting that together because it does a great job of documenting the early days and these guys going from just trying to make it down to learning how to thermal and learning how to go far. Enjoy this chat with Tom Pagini and Bill Liscomb. Cheers. This is really special to me. Thank you guys for joining us on the Mayhem this week because Bill, I was sent your film quite a long time ago by Hugh at XC Mag and said, you got to check this out. And I just was, it sucked me in right from the moment go. And it's just a beautiful film, The Big Blue Sky, and the history is amazing. I've got this, I showed you guys this before we started recording. I just took note after note after note after note because it's got all the names, Otto and Barry Palmer and Dave Kilmore and Joe Faust and John Dickinson. It goes on and on and on and on. And of course, Tom Pagini, you're part of that list. And thank you again for doing this together. And like we did with Malcolm, you're going to be the main interviewer here because you know so much of this history better than I do. But welcome both of you to the show. And I just can't wait to dive into this. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Bill, you and I have known each other for a long time, so I'm going to ask some questions to begin with from the start of your flying adventures. It seems that flying's been a constant theme in your life. And where did that come from?
I don't know. I have a picture of my sister and myself at the beach in Santa Monica in the very early 50s playing in the sand. And I got a cast metal jet fighter, and, at home for entertainment, I'd get two chairs facing each other and put a cardboard box upside down between them and get up inside the box and draw instrument panels on the inside of the box, and make believe I was flying airplanes, and, my dad was a decorated World War II veteran. He was a co-pilot on a B-24D. And he's one of the survivors of the August 1st, 1943 Ploesti raid, the low-level kamikaze run on the refineries there. And you get the Air Medal and the DFC for flying that. And was later, they crashed. They did an emergency landing in Switzerland, and he was interned for 2 years there. And, I've always shared that love of aviation with my dad. We speak flying, and I've just always loved everything flying. I believe when it came out, Ernest Gann's Fate is the Hunter came out in the early 60s. And I remember reading that when I was like 10 or 12 years old and just going, wow, this is amazing stuff, and, I just had the airplane bug. Somebody told me in high school about this. This was in 1967 or so. Mentioned the phrase radio controlled glider. And I was like, oh, I could afford one of those. I need one of those. Where do I find one of those? In 1967, South Shore, Massachusetts, south of Boston. There weren't no radio controlled gliders, I'll tell you. But that kind of got me on the path. That's
great. We're gonna. That's also been a constant theme in your life. We're going to get back to that
yes
a little later. But by August 1972 issue of Ground Skimmer, which I just looked at this morning, by the way, you wrote in, which Ground Skimmer was the newsletter of the Southern California Hang Gliding Association, which is the predecessor to the United States.
And it was after the Harbor Soaring Society. Yeah.
You wrote in saying that you were selling a lighter version of my cylindrical regalo called an Aerion, or Aeroid was your company. When did you first fly or attempt to fly a hang glider?
Actually, photographic proof will show that it is May 23rd, 1971 at the first Lilienthal meet. But actually, we had that hang loose and built in Riverside near Mount Rubidoux. And we finished it one night and traipsed it across University Ave to a empty field at about 11 o'clock at night and ran it down the slope. And I think I flew from where the hill kind of, rolled into the sidewalk to the other side of the sidewalk, and everybody fell down and skinned their ankles and knees or whatever. But the first real flight I had was that at the first Lilienthal meet.
Which is really interesting, because the third question is, you were present flying a hang loose biplane at the first auto meet in Riverside in 1971.
Corona Del Mar, Newport, not Riverside. Yeah.
Okay, it was in Corona Del Mar. Okay, Newport, and that was the first auto meet, and that was on May 23rd.
Otto Lilienthal's birthday.
May 23rd. Yeah.
So it's it.
In your film, Bill, it was you guys started these meets started happening every weekend, right? I mean, it was.
Yes, to an extent. Yeah, Joe Faust was very instrumental in that. He had after the first Lilienthal meet, there was a Montgomery meet, I think in August down in San Diego, but he had like the turkey fly, the beach fly, the photo fly with everybody on the hillside out in Norco. And Joe was very, very instrumental in organizing those things.
That's amazing. How many were, in a typical meet, how many people would show up?
Well, at the first Lilienthal meet, there were about a dozen hang gliders there, roughly. And
really,
when I moved to California in 1969, I ended up in Riverside, California, and I was just over the hill from Flaybob Airport, which is Experimental Aircraft Association Chapter 1. And it was a hotbed of aviation whack jobs, and, Art Scholl was he was in charge of the aviation department at San Bernardino Valley College, where I was enrolled. And he also gave lessons there, aerobatic lessons. And, Mac Riley was there. He had this sailplane operation at Elsinore. They used Howard DGAs for tow planes. And just a whole raft of other people. Met Jack Lambie there before his hang gliding adventures, and it was like old home week to go out to the first Lilienthal meet and see all. Hey, I know you, and I'd see them building their stuff at the airport too.
And is there Tom mentioned you had a company already at this point, but when I had Miguel Gutierrez on the show, they were kind of getting started around the same time, also because of his father down in Mexico, and he talked about that they were building these things from just junk they were finding on the side of the road. They rubber tires from bikes and bamboo poles, and was it pretty ghetto like that? You're just putting these things together.
Yeah, after that first Lilienthal meet, a bunch of us dropped out of school and just made it our daily job to work on the hang glider in the parking lot of our apartment building and build new stuff, fix the old stuff, and then go fly in the afternoon and party, dude. What else was there, And we made the hang gliders out of the first ones, the first few regalos. I had that hang loose at the first Lilienthal meet, and when we left, it was in a 55-gallon barrel. It had been crashed so many times there was nothing worth saving, and too much plastic in the wreckage to start a fire with. But Taras Kosenek, his stuff flew good. That Batso flew great, so I called him up, went over and measured his Batso, and me and the crew would get in the Volkswagen camper with some hacksaws and drive around Riverside and go, look, a stand of bamboo. And we'd go over there and cut down the bamboo, tie it on the roof, and trim it up and make the hang gliders out of it, get the steel tubing to sleeve it at the muffler shop, and plastic sheeting, baling wire, duct tape. Colored duct tape was pretty cool, I'll tell you. That made it.
Terrace, I've got him written down. He was the Icarus 1
and the Icarus 5,
Icarus
yeah.
2.
And his father was very a big part of organizing the hang gliding too. When it went from the South Bay hang gliding to SoCal hang gliding. I did get a phone call saying, would you consider being the president of it? And I was out in Riverside and they're all over in, Long Beach. I'm like, no, Billy, don't do that, And, but he was also Terrace Senior was the inspiration for our cylindrical leading edge truncated tip glider that we built under the banner of Imperial Engine Works. And how we built that was we found an irrigation company called Rain for Rent, just south of Riverside on the 15. And it was 2-inch 050 tubing. And the alloy of it was like 50 -2 ? You get rust spots in it, but it was like, affordable, it was like 25 cents a foot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, load it up, boy. And, we got those cylindrical leading edges by marking it and, every 6 inches or so. And we found that where we lived, there was a telephone pole with a stop sign next to it. And, we'd get the thing and just kind of put dents in it every 6 inches until we got the shape right. And, so that was probably he gave me NASA reports that showed the benefits of cylindrical leading edges and truncated tips. And we're like, oh, that's far out, man. Let's try that. And,
most of the early experimenters had the same NASA reports because they had different aspect ratios that they tested. And truncated tips in your glider at one time had truncated tips on it too.
That first one, in 71, we had a truncated tip glider.
Well, what was the biggest flight you had? It had a T-bar?
An inverted T-bar, all cantilevered.
Right.
With a little Prince post, not a king post, but a Prince post, because the aspect ratio was like 1.
Square, yeah.
It was
20-foot keel.
So the keel is kind of a little too flexes with one.
So what was your greatest flight you had?
We made it to the bottom of the hill a lot of times.
That's big. That's big.
And we could turn and land into the wind. and not have to nurse cracked ribs or broken glider, land on your feet sometimes even. It was pretty exciting.
I have to remind myself sometimes when we just get going to the beach sinky flight that, hey, remember there was a time in your life where you'd have talked about this for months?
Right. Oh, the next glider we made after that, we found some pole vault poles, and we pre-tensioned the pole vault poles. And, and everybody, like Flay Bob's like, pre-tension, that ain't good, whoa. We're like, well, it's really light, and it may have had an aspect ratio of 2, geez, it was a hot rod, and it had a regular control bar by then, but that was kind of a cool thing. And there's a picture somewhere in my library of John Havens flying that with a regular control bar, and the ends of it extended past the corners and were swept back. And he's like totally supine, zooming down the hill. It's like, dude, this is going to be a thing.
So you knew all of the original California enthusiasts like Jack Lambie, Richard Miller, Joe Faust, Bruce Carmichael, Dick Eipert, Dave Kronk. Do you have any precious anecdotes that you...
We've only got an hour, Tom, please.
That's all right. We'll stretch it out.
Now, actually, I will say that Big Blue Sky is autobiographical. It's my life story. I know I'm in that movie at least a dozen times. And, and I was there. I'm like Forrest Gump. I didn't ever design anything famous. I didn't, have a big hang glider company. I never won a meet, but, I'm in a lot of those pictures, just like Forrest Gump, I was there. I know the people. I know them all, when they did Big Blue Sky, it was like, every middle-aged man's dream of reliving his youth, going to visit everybody, and, it was really fun to do that. But yeah, that's, I look back on it, and I learned, I met Lloyd Leitcher, and we're a bunch of hippies, and Lloyd is like square, and, he's, if I ever get a chance to grow up, I'd like to be like Lloyd Leitcher. Let me say that, just a really fine human being, really nice man. He took the Soaring.
Please elaborate about what he did, by the way, for our viewers.
So Lloyd Leitcher was an aeronautical engineer who he worked with the boys up there in the Sierras where they were doing the wave experiments and examined some of the wreckage after some of the planes got dissected by the wave. And he went on to become the editor and the director of the Soaring Society of America for 20 years. And over that 20 years, they averaged a new member a day. Wow. Think about that. And he fortunately got in as the director of USHCA, United States, first SoCal and the United States Hang Gliding Association. And it was just, excellent about it. I asked him, when I interviewed him, I said, how did, your lifestyle is so different from people in early hang gliding, what was that? Did that present any problems for you? Like if Dick Eipert showed up tripping his brains out, I mean, I didn't say that, but Lloyd is just so cool and calm and collected, and focused on his, just his love of flight. He says, no, we just had a job to do. We had work to do and we did it,
Well, he also left the Soaring Society to pursue creating the
That's right.
Hang Gliding Association.
That's very important.
After trying to bring the two together, because he thought that there's so much knowledge that could be shared with hang gliding to make it safer. And they didn't. The people at SSA didn't buy it, and he left to pursue USHPA, which was really great. It was a big sacrifice.
He saw hang gliding as a perfect gateway drug to sailplanes. And, he's absolutely right. When I was flying sailplanes in the early 2000s, I go to Warner Springs, and 60% of the people there were my buddies from Torrey Pines, dudes from Elsinore. Everybody's flying sailplanes, so he was on it.
What grabs me so much, Bill, from the movie that just made me smile endlessly was we always say we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And, we these days you wouldn't go out for what you guys were doing. You're getting more on a glide on your very beginning ENA paraglider than you guys were on these hang gliders. And, like you said, it was such a big deal to just make it down to the bottom of the hill and be able to turn into the wind. But, you could just see that these weekend meets, the stoke was through the roof. I mean, you were doing what Da Vinci had surmised was possible, and but I don't even have a question here. But the stoke and the drive and it seemed like the community too was driving this, pioneering this new sport. But you were. I don't know. Comment on that. Just the
Sure. Yeah, that's when Joe Faust had those first meets, in 71. I think it was in the fall. We went to Torrance Beach, and George French, one of our crew at Imperial Engine Works, made it to like where the sand was freshly wet. We're like, dude, see how far he went? And then, like an hour or so later, we're sitting there, and this terrace shows up with the Icarus One, takes off right to left, goes down a couple hundred yards, and he does a soaring turn and comes back, and he's like 20 to 50 feet above us. He's flying with the hang tubes with his feet up in front of him. And he just looks over at us and goes, and wiggles his finger at us. And we're just like, oh, he's soaring. Oh my God.
No possibilities.
We just, we were
minds blown
away. But yeah, it was like that. You go see stuff, and there's some real crackpot gizmos that people were trying to fly with. And, some were successful, some were hilarious, like look at the outtakes in Big Blue Sky, the whack attack, that kind of says it all, And
so you were present also at Joe Faust's iconic photo session. It was really, I think it was the first color photo of hang gliders that was distributed other than National Geographic, and everyone, all the experimenters at the time were there, and so you knew Vollmer Jensen and all the others.
Yeah, it was like we knew everybody. Vollmer did not like the flexible wings, and we're a bunch of hippies. He was a little scary. He had this hat he wore that was a little, maybe it leaned one way that we didn't lean, everybody there, Lloyd Leitcher was there, Joe Faust. I worked for Joe Faust one day at his publishing suite over there in Venice, I believe. And, Richard Miller, in later years, he lived in my neck of the woods in San Diego County, and I'd stop by and see him all the time, and it was always like, yes, master, go in there and what are we doing? I tried to interview him for Big Blue Sky. I had an RV and, all the video equipment. My son's with me. We're on a road trip. We get up to Santa Cruz, and he's doing like kinesiology analysis of customers there, And so I'm like, hey, Richard, this is great. I showed him a little model I had, an electric model with carbon D-tube on it. He's like, oh, this is fascinating. This is unbelievable. And Richard, could we do this? He said, no, we'll do it later. We have other important things here. Sit down, knees to knee, and hold my hands, And told me what supplements I need to take. It's just like, okay, it's what we got, and indeed it's kind of better that he's wasn't interviewed, just kind of that he can remain the mystic, the ascended master of spiritual flight. He just had so many wonderful concepts. Like in the 60s, in his book, Without Visible Means of Support, he was talking about parachutes and says, I can see someday where these things can actually glide and people will use them to do cross-country flights. You read that and it's like, okay, he's not a crackpot. He just really is a visionary. He was really into the place where our dreams are made.
So for people who don't know, Richard Miller was really one of the great inspirations of free flight, starting with hang gliding, and his book Without Visible Means of Support is full of anecdotes from the perilous and poignant past that are very, as he termed it, that are really even good contemporary. That still gets the meaning of flight, and
the spirit of it.
Bill said, he was
literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was the editor of Soaring magazine, and with Jack Lambie, did a very interesting article about called Project Thistledown that really foresaw planes like Archaeopteryx and the Swift rigid wing, with high school kids bungee launching their friends from Montana grassy slopes and things. Just it's really a true vision.
Yeah, and he and Rich Miller, Joe Faust, Jack Lambie, his brother Mark Lambie. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of people there. Were the people the organizers for the first Lilienthal meet. And, it was just I was going to college and I got in an airframe maintenance and repair class, got a little booklet that somebody had made up, and it was called Low and Slow, Volume 1. Ooh, plans, hang gliders. I know what hang gliders are. Oh, there's going to be a meet. I should get these plans and build something for it. And, we got to the meet and there's hundreds of people. There's a lot of people there. There's cars and the cops show up and a helicopter comes flying overhead. I'm standing next to Jack Lambie and the helicopter says, "Well, the organizers of this meet, please report to the police cars at the bottom of the hill." And Jack Lambie, right on cue, goes, "Oh, somebody organized this?" Classic. Okay, guys, just don't start any fires, okay? And if you need it, this is owned by a cemetery, over the hill. Look us up if you have any problems,
So my first ocean soaring flight was with you at Torrey Pines. I believe it was in May 1974, after the auto meet that was held up at Sylmar that year.
Yeah.
And you were flying an Iper Standard, but it had a camber cut sail made by Tom Price.
Albatross sail, yeah. Albatross sail.
Right. And that began a long friendship and collaboration between you two.
I like to think that I'm alive because of Tom Price. He's an aeronautical engineer. He worked for McDonnell Douglas, worked on designing the wing for the DC-9 and 10, burned out on that, on the aerospace industry, and went to work at North Sails. Saw a hang glider, and, he had the skill pack right there, And, I spent a lot of time with Tom, worked on, in 1976 at Telluride, we had Hang Glider Manufacturers Association meeting, and they had been pretty active. But in 76, they elected Peter Brock to be the president, and I was the treasurer. And we got it in gear. Gliders started getting certified. everybody started, all the manufacturers started working on the certification things. Yeah. And, I worked with Tom. I did airspeed calibration. I flew with a anemometer and lowered it 50 feet below the glider and had another one on the control bar. So we calibrated the pressure wave, creating the different airspeeds and stuff like that. And right after, I kind of burned out on hang gliding and played music for a while. And right about then is when he and the real Jim Walker put a platform on top of a travel all. And I think there's some footage around. You can see a young Tom Pagini just about get killed with those things bucking and jumping around and pitch excursions.
Not tied in, no helmet, no shirt, no pants.
Shorts, just a pair of shorts, 40 miles an hour down a country road.
What could go wrong? Yeah.
Dead.
With a negative pitch stability glider, trying to throw you off.
Yeah, so Tom Price, working there was just, that was a lot of fun. I had, I did the wiring and final assembled a lot of ASG 21s. And unfortunately, I had to test fly them. You put it together, you test fly it,
Bill, why did you get burned out on hang gliding?
I think I was just scared.
Was this around when because in the movie there's this real shift from there's weekend meets, everybody's flying down the hill, it's a big party, bunch of hippies, others, there's the airspace, there's all this combination of kind of the right people, it seems like, come together. Mm-hmm. Everybody, even now this community is so eccentric. You've just got people from so many different backgrounds. Just one of the things I love about it. But you had this right combination, and then I guess it's Terrace Jr. who's the first person to thermal, and things really shift there, right? There's a real shift in accidents start going through the roof. Was that part of it?
I mean, that was 74 when Terrace soared
the first time.
That was at Danny Green Springs. He took off and just like up at the back of the hill. It's like, and then he came back, and I was scared flying there. I was flying on the coast and smooth air, and it was a little bumpy in there at Selmar. And by then I had seen what happens to quote unquote standard regalos at low angles of attack. You ever been on a sailboat and you tack, you get that angle too low and
locked in irons.
Yeah. Or, it just, what we call a full off dive, I'd seen it, I hadn't experienced it firsthand, but that's a sound I'll never forget. As long as I live, every time I hear a truck go down the road with a big flag on the back, I can hear it. It sounds just like it.
Was that one of the reasons why you switched over to rigid wings? You were an early convert. You had a quick
exactly right. That is exactly right. I saw that. Let's see now. When Boeing makes an airplane, they put the company on the line. That it's going to be successful. They have a tail. It's in the back. I'll take one of those.
And you flew that quite a bit.
I flew the cheapers out of that poor thing.
How much knowledge back then too was being? That's a cool picture.
That's it.
How much knowledge then is, because it also talks about Mr. Smooth in the movie, Dave Cronk and the first world championship in 75, which Tom, you did too, right? Yeah, over in Kosin, amazing site. They just flew quite a few 300 plus FAIs out of there the other day on paragliders. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Nice.
Epic day in Europe. Yeah. But these pockets are happening. I mean, it wasn't just you guys. It was happening in other parts of the world around the same time. But is a lot of that knowledge being shared, or are you guys kind of in a bubble?
Knowledge about
just design, thermaling, starting to go places.
MS, MD, monkey see, monkey do, And it's like hot rodding. It's like surfing. You know, I can go faster than that. Watch this. Yeah. I can do better than that. You know, it's just, you know, nature of
Humanity.
Mankind, you know, that, you know, there was, you know, the getting together at the meets and stuff is where you'd get that information, you know, by seeing it, you know.
Your mother, Bettina Gray, aka Batty White, was one of the three top photographers, three or four, in hang gliding. What was her background, along with Bill Allen and Steve McCarroll and Georgie Vegas?
Yep.
Bettina White, you know, many covers of Hang Gliding magazine, and she wasn't a camp follower, but she did go to a lot of the. She would drive up in her Mercedes saloon, and was present at a lot of the meets. Could you tell us more about her?
All right, she was the daughter of a automotive industrialist. A little over 100 years ago, she'd be 110. She was born in 1915, and you know, got into acting, you know, debutante and all that old school Boston Brahmin stuff, you know, and had my sister in 1941, and me in 49, and she was interested in flying. You know, we moved to Florida and she took flying lessons down there, and I got to backseat a few of those, you know. And my stepdad, who she met down there, was a pilot. I don't know if he was licensed or not, but he'd rent airplanes and fly us places. He was a real certified crazy, my kind of guy. I'll just say that, you know. And so, you know, she was into that. And she came to that first Lilienthal meet. You know, her first hang gliding pictures are of the first auto, 052371. And she took them with an Instamatic 110. And my first flight, the hang tubes that you hung onto broke out of the glider and spilled me verily onto the earth. So we duct tape, baling wire, screwdriver, hammer, you know, rigged the thing back up, and then did the big flight where I did the big deep stall and recovery. So she, you know, there's pictures of that thing coming back down the hill upside down and broken, and, you know, I was having lunch, and then we went on to fly. And a year or two later, my sister gave her a Nicormat camera for Christmas, and I guess the rest is history from there. You know, she really enjoyed going to all the meets, like the Owens Valley, you know, and World's Meets, you know, and Japan, and the Masters at Grandfather's. You know, she was all over the map, man.
She was great. Yeah. She was great. Bettina, how are you? I'm wonderful. That's how, you know, with the beautiful accent.
Was she also one of the ways you got so much footage? Was she taking video as well?
No, she wasn't. That footage I have of the first Lilienthal meet was taken by my sister, Bettina Bancroft. Wow. She was there with a Super 8. She's wearing a black top and white shorts. And of some of those shots at the first Lilienthal meet, like of me taking off when that segment of the film starts, that's me. You know, it's in Super 8. And then the zoom in is 16 millimeter that was digitized. And, you know, there's several flights. I think Richard Miller's really long flight with the Conduit Condor, where the guys duck under the Batso, Terrace and his crew duck, you know, and bail. God, it's Richard. And there's like 3 or 4 different camera angles on that from people who shot the same thing, you know. So that was pretty cool to get all those different angles at the same shot. Oh God, who did Playground in the Sky?
Yeah,
Carl Banish. Yeah.
Was there, Bill, did your mom's going to all these meets and shooting all this stuff? Did you guys ever get a talking to? I mean, was there ever any, you know, listen, Bill, you need to slow it down here. She was just gung-ho. That is awesome.
No.
No helicopter parenting going on here.
No, get out of the way. Here's an example of a conversation between us. Torrey Pines, it's cracking, and there's a bunch of gliders lined up to go. And I'm about 5 or 6 in the line. I'm walking down to launch to get in line. And my mom's down there to the south of the line. And I'd yell out, "Hey, somebody get that old bat out of the launch area." She's like, "Oh, Bill." And guys are like, "Hey, that's Bettina. What are you talking to?" It's my mom. Back off. It's my mom. She was into having fun. I'll tell you that.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Didn't she have you model when you were a child?
Yeah. Well, not her. This girl had a crush on me and talked my mom into getting horseback riding lessons. So I'd go out and horseback ride lessons with this girl who had a crush on me. And this girl was tied up with the K-Lo model agency in Palm Beach, Florida. And I was a redheaded kid, and
like Billy Mummy.
And pretty soon I'm in an L&M cigarette ad. It was both still and on TV, and Buick automobiles, Studebaker Lark, fashion shows. Those were the worst. You're 12 years old, and these women who are ancient, God, they must have been 40 or something, come with too much perfume and big bosoms giving you, "Oh, you're so cute." It's like, run. But yeah, I did that. Part of my experience.
And you were a very early convert to flying advanced rigid wing gliders like the Atos and the Axis.
No, I was kind of, I got out of my focus in flying, went from hang gliding to sailplanes in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And when I sold my last hang glider of that era, it was a Seedwings sensor, 510, A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever the heck. I don't remember that. Yeah, they really were. I had the opportunity at Torrey Pines before I bought my last sensor of flying Bob Trampano's sensor against Steve Pearson in Steve Pearson's HP and swapping gliders. So I'd fly the designer in his glider, versus the other designer's glider against him. It was a really, really wonderful comparison. And I would say if, my decision was that for coastal flying, for milder thermals, the sensor just kicked ass. You could skate it sideways, you find the core, you kind of throw your feet and push, and the thing would start just track and core up but the Wilswing was it made you feel a lot safer with a more pointy nose,
You then started flying sailplanes in Southern California. But actually, before that, do you think that flying RC gliders may have been key in keeping you from doing a lot of stupid stuff?
Yeah.
Other people, I credit that for saving my life.
Yeah, a lot of people do. We hear that a lot on the show.
What you think about
that seems to be an excellent precursor. Maybe kayaking, sailing. There's some other sports too that seem to really help us understand the invisible, but RC seems to be the key one there, right?
Right. Yeah, before that first Lilienthal meet, I'd flown RCs for at least a year. I'd soloed a Cub Special at Flaybob, and I'd been up in sailplanes at Elsinore, with Mac.
That's great background.
So, I knew how to fly. Basically, I understood how the whole thing worked rather than like, oh, look, an airplane.
So then you became a sailplane pilot and really pursued that.
Yeah. In the early 80s is when I got my sailplane license. I built a Moni by Mona Aircraft. I built a little single seat motor glider called the Moni, and got my license so I could fly it whenever I wanted to. And, I flew it. I registered it as a motor glider so I could fly it with a glider rating. So I didn't have to go through all that talk on the radio and navigate crap. I just wanted to fly, And that's where I got my license. So I got my license up at Hemet Ryan. And Galen Fisher, who was a hang glider pilot, RC pilot, was my instructor, and held my hand through the whole process of up and through the check ride. And that kind of laid dormant for another 10 years. And I ended up in the mid 90s, 96, 97, buying a Russia AC-4C, little single seat, 13 and a half meter sailplane. And, started flying sailplanes. And, it was just, it took a while because the thermaling, my inner ear, just circling 40-degree bank, 30-degree bank endlessly took a little getting used to, but that kind of I really, really enjoyed that. All my hang gliding experience really, really helped me transition into that, aside from the physiological issue. But I just really, that was my dream. I was getting Soaring magazine in 1970, and I'd see an ASW-12 and just, wow, look at that. Oh my God, and, I lived to fly for about 12 years in sailplanes. I had the Russia, and I'd got rid of that and had a HPH 304 CZ-17 made for me. Plug-in interchangeable wingtips would be 15 meters or 17.4. And another opportunity presented itself, and I got the first Diana 2 15-meter racer in the United States, and that's all carbon. The wings are hollow. There's a partition down the middle of the inside of the wing so that you can have front and rear water tanks. The whole wing fills up with water. And close to 50 to 1 L over D.
Wow.
The first glider, Richard Johnson, tested that when they loaded it up with water, it went faster, so the Reynolds number was higher. Drag went down, and the L over D actually increased. Most of the time, the polar just shifts over, 10, 15 miles an hour when you add water. So, that thing was just an amazing, it was like the Starship Enterprise, and, 50 to 1, you're 15,000 feet over Big Bear Lake. Warner Springs is 55 miles away. You can't see it because of the mountains and the curvature of the earth.
And you got it.
Punch it in on the flight computer, and it's like, oh, you'll arrive there with over 9,000 feet of altitude. It's like,
whoa.
Yeah. And the thing would just, you could, a lot of the sailplane pilots talk about the dolphin flying, where you slow down and lift and then speed up before you get the edge of it and race off to the next bump. It didn't take too strong a day to do that with the Diana because of the low sink rate. They right around 90 feet a second or a minute, and 50 to 48 to 50 to 1 L over D. I'd take off from Warner Springs and go to San Jacinto, 35 miles away, take off at 3,800 feet and go to almost 11,000, and I could just kind of bump fly over there. And the previous sailplanes, you have to stop and climb and glide and stop. People take off after me. Where are you, Bill? I go, oh, they don't want to hear this. I'm at San Jac. And they're looking for their second thermal. It's just like, oh. But I really, really enjoyed that. I got my diamond badge at Warner Springs, and it was like a dream come true. It was just fantastic experiences flying that thing.
So, what was your motivation, and what did you think of making Big Blue Sky?
Well, when Bettina passed away, she gave all of her photos to Vertigo Inc., Roy Haggard's company. She really had a crush on Dave Kronk in her final chapter of life, and God bless him, he was such a gentleman. I'd send her cards, dear Bettina, thank you so much for your card and note, and so they ended up with all the stuff, and they called me up and said, dude, we don't know what to do with this stuff. We're going to throw it out. You want it? Like 3 or 4 filing cabinets. Unfortunately, all the black and white negatives had been in her garage in Rancho Santa Fe, which was neither heated nor air conditioned. And it was in a dark room with plumbing, and it got really moist and it destroyed all the negatives. They all got, all the emulsion came out of the color slides, and all the black and whites, looked like a dry lake bed. So it was kind of, pick and choose. And I was going, oh man, this is a nightmare. What is this, like 50,000 pictures here for God? Who gave this woman a camera? Jesus. And I was walking by those one day to go to my little recording studio in the garage. And I just had this epiphany. And it's like, Bill, you must make the movie and tell the story. And it was just like, I was just vibrating with that. And I went, yeah, I know all the people. I have footage. I know who has the footage. It'd be easy. It'd be so easy, to do it. And so I did.
And it wasn't easy.
No, it was over 5 years. It was almost 5 years.
Yeah, I would have guessed that. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Stops and starts. Yeah, and you time out, go fly the sailplane.
Yeah.
Get aired out.
And editing's brutal, and it's an important story. I imagine you were very passionate about getting it right because it clearly comes through.
Yeah, I looked at different ways to do it as, I got the project, as I started writing the script and, getting the storyline laid out in my head and everything. And, I thought, PBS, this would be great on PBS. And they said, well, here's the first loophole you have to jump through. And then you can do this, but you can't do that. And you can do this and do that. And you have to, and I'm like, nope.
You do it my way.
I think I'm paying for this one. This one's on me, boys. This is the way it has to be told, And I heard one filmmaker somewhere in a talk somewhere or something say, the best way, my advice to people who want to be filmmakers is, if you want to be a successful filmmaker, you have to be willing to do everything it takes to do the film, whatever's next. And holy mackerel, some of those next things are
Bill,
backbreaking.
There's this scene in the film. I forget who the pilots were, but I mean, sorry for the language here, but it's just batshit to me. I couldn't believe it. But these guys launch into Bryce Canyon. It just doesn't look like there's any place to land. It's beautiful. It's amazing. But it strikes the question of, what's the most amazing thing you've seen in these decades and decades of free flight?
I think soaring in the sailplanes, just because they're so dynamic, I mean, it's just, there's just been some amazing experiences with birds and weather and at Torrey Pines and some of the inland sites and in hang gliding, but with a sailplane, I mean, you fly through a bunch of different air masses, like you have the Gulf of Mexico air mass coming up, and then you have the Anza-Borrego air mass, and then you have the onshore breeze, then you have the other, and just the vastness of the earth, and seeing these gigantic swifts at 14,000 feet flying the same speed I'm flying, and a long sighting of them is like 3 seconds, And again, I really just get a sense of just being a grain of sand, at the bottom of the ocean. It's just, really, and just the awe and the beauty of nature.
Tom's got a Will's Wing T-shirt on, and about halfway down our list of all these amazing people are the Wills brothers, Peter Brock, Anita Hall. Tell us a story about this gang.
Oh man. Well, it was kind of like, it was like surfing, dude. Everybody had their spot and their crew, and I was like a Tory rat. And, we were like, I was aligned with the Iper guys, So I knew them. I don't know if you want any more of those stories, but
Tom went,
yeah. I think Tom went there, and so that was
Dave Mules fan.
Yeah. And the Wills guys, they're just kind of like these straight cut dudes, and they had their crew. They had that cowboy that drove that light blue pickup truck up and down the mountain at Escape Country, and so it didn't really have much interaction with them. We're always kind of doing your thing. And Danita and Dave moved down to San Diego, in the 80s, I think, and got to fly with them a lot, and they were really fun. Danita's just kick ass, get out of the way, and Dave was a lot of fun. I flew with him, took me for a ride in his Long Easy. And some of these other, Peter Brock, yep, did a lot of flying with him. He was there in 1973 down at Pio Pico Park in San Diego. And we watched a Whitney Porta-Wing full luff in. That flapping in the breeze flag sound that triggers my PTSD, I will tell you. Standing there talking to Peter, and all this guy like bounced at least one, maybe two. It's like, oh. And, that was pretty terrifying. The guy showed up the next day, had both his hands in a cast like he's holding the control bar. It was kind of like, oops. But flew Peter a lot, he, it's interesting. My sister's first husband, Michael Goth, raced cars. And the guys who were his engineers and mechanics were Bruce Burness and Trevor Harris, who later worked for Peter Brock and made Brock Racing Enterprises, where they raced little Datsun 510s and 240s. They were the core of that, So I just found that out recently, and a good time with Peter, it was really special getting to interview him. And
you're inducted into the Rogallo Hall of Fame at Kitty Hawk? I thought you were. And, you were definitely made a presentation to Smithsonian.
Yeah, via Gary Fogel put that together. The National Air and Space Museum had the General Aviation lecture series, and Kay and I got flown back to DC and put up for a couple of nights and had a catered dinner in the Wright brothers room gallery with the president, the head curator, who was a ex-Marine general, and I was kind of thinking, boy, it's 10 hoot and a flat top, and the guy was just like us, oh man, hey, did you go down and see this stuff, and just airplane junkie, and it was really fun. So that was very exciting to get to do that, to bring hang gliding downtown, to the mall, baby. And so, hang glider pilots, geez, we're not real high on the hierarchy of glamorous aviators, it's just like whack jobs, in America anyway, here it was like, suicidal tendencies, dusty bums. And I went to Germany with Larry Newman in 1976, and we said, oh, you are an American. You are an American hang glider pilot. You will sit with us and we will buy you beer. And you're setting up your hang glider. There's a Lufthansa 747 pilot here, and in front of you is some nuclear physicist, and they're all like, oh, American hang glider pilot, And then you get back home and say, out of the way, dirtbag, But they paid a lot of money for my equipment.
You're in the film. You talk about that Anthony Matthews, the musician Steamboat Springs, his death really struck hard. And then, of course, the two Wills brothers, Eric and Bob.
Yeah.
There was some pretty heavy carnage going on when things started going up with hang gliders. What did that do to the community? We talk about now that we really need cheap mistakes. What we want is cheap mistakes to learn. These were not cheap mistakes. They were the worst kind of mistakes, obviously. But
Yep.
I imagine they were quite instrumental in safety in the future, but also these are hard knocks.
Yeah. It's, like Donita said there, it was just so hard to comprehend, it was like, we got some bad stuff in, it's mixed with fentanyl and somebody OD'd, won't happen to me, Ken DeRusi says, yeah, it's safe. Come on. What's the problem? You're fine, but, there's a real dichotomy there, between, I've got to go do this, Anthony Matthews and Peter Brock's son, Hall, they both died almost on, there was like 3 weeks there where, they went in, those two went in, and then Jack Schroeder was paralyzed up at Point Furman. And I just went, man, I think maybe I'm going to do something else for a little while here and digest this. But, that the good news is everybody took note of it and was well aware of what they did wrong and strove to not repeat the same mistake and develop the aircraft a lot better, and that goes back to getting them certified. That really helped a lot. And the parachute, those were just like epic events,
Big, huge shifts in the sport.
Yeah. I remember in the 90s, Flying Magazine had an article on aviation safety. If somebody's really into researching it, that article is there. And it showed the fatalities per 100,000 hours. And general aviation was at like 5.2 or, 5.2. Hang gliding was at like 2.4. I'm like, dude, it's because we were all flying with a parachute right here, hooked to the airframe. And because of that, I always felt naked going for a ride with some kid in his Ukrainian airplane with no parachute, and it's just such a boon, to have that just boom right there.
There's actually a quote in the film is that the reason a lot of people died is that they thought it was safe. This still surprises me. I mean, you hear this now with, beginners are, when they get into the sport, they're not told that, and it's not intrinsic. I think it's these things are very easy to fly. They're hard to fly well, but they're very easy to fly. And this is a weird one, isn't it? I mean, that people still think it's safe. It's not. It's just
well, I think that's kind of the sales pitch for it.
100%.
I'm just because in the general media
with this quote.
Back in the day, it was like, it's dangerous. Look at all the people. Another one died. And that's true. We've run out of fingers and toes counting our friends who perished. I mean, wow. And so when somebody asks you how safe it is, I think for the pilots and the people actively doing it, it's kind of a defensive thing to say, well, it's as safe as you make it. It's, it's safe. I'm doing it.
What do you chalk up your own survival to? That there are, in this list, we've got one sitting with us right now, Tom Pagini, but in this list, a lot of these guys and girls still around. How did you thread that needle?
I think I didn't want to be the first to do a 360. There in 72, 3, 4, that was a big deal, doing a 360. And people died. One of the scenes in Whack Attack is Lloyd Short with the Moon Eyes kite taking out a big creosote bush with his hang glider trying a 360 and blabbo! It's hilarious. But people didn't know when you turn in an airplane, you have to increase the angle of attack to create more lift to keep the nose up so you don't do a death spiral. you know, and, I think, I was just very timid. I'd want to see people do stuff, and like Tom said earlier, it's like, well, gee, these regalos have a known issue with, pitch instability. Huh, a tail. That seems pretty good. Yeah. Get something with a tail. That's the ticket. And I did get back into hang gliding, by the way, after I started really scaring myself with the Diana 2. With that much performance, with that an amazing sink rate and spectacular glide ratio, I'd go a little farther up that canyon, I'd get a little lower, farther away, I'd start doing, get into situations and later go,
that's kind of too close.
That wasn't very conservative, that was a little on the other side of the risk line. And, I just knew I started having vision problems, started getting ophthalmic migraines where you get these, like a prismatic thing in your vision, and you lose your peripheral vision, and everything kind of looks like that. You can see it, but you can't get the detail. And I thought, well, you know what? I go back into hang gliding. This stuff happens a lot slower. If I'm slope soaring at Torrey Pines, where are you going to go? Whereas in the sailplane, if I get one of those events, I can't look at my flight computer, which is, a screen that big, to get me home, So it's like, well, I'll wait here until this passes, So I got an ATOS and a Freedom 170, and wow, both of those excellent choices. I would have to say that early ATOS was the best thermaling glider I've ever flown. You get it in at one of those Torrey Pines 300 foot a minute thermals and drifting back with the sea breeze. And it's like flying a Schweitzer 233. You bank it up and you just push it out until the wing starts to rumble a little bit. And you go way far back and glide home. So, and then I pulled a muscle taking off in the Freedom 170 one late afternoon, and hey, Bill, maybe it's time to quit hang gliding. So,
hey, on a very light note, tell us about Hang Diving Magazine and Diver Driver.
Well, I don't know if you guys ever noticed this, but like in the early days of hang gliding, there was a large percentage of the population of pilots were cynical smart alecks. And the first one that was really fun to be around was Rich Finley, who was a Top Gun naval aviator. He may very well have been in the first generation of people to come through there in the early 70s. I met him like 73. And I think that's about when Top Gun started. And I know he went on to be an adversary instructor, but he had nicknames for everybody, We'd be at a meet, and he was we called him Motor Mouth because he's just going all the time, all this data and stuff you never knew you needed to know. And somebody come in on a hang glider and they'd try to be hitting the bullseye, and he'd flare 20 feet above the bullseye, and Rich would just say, well, you can park it there, but it won't taxi very well. Stuff like that. And, we started nicknaming calling them hang divers, that just kind of went on and on and on. And my friend Bill Recker and I think we excelled at that. We had a natural born talent for that. And we did we talked Gil Dodgen, at the editor at Hang Gliding Magazine, to let us do an April Fool's issue. And we did the Hang Diving Magazine, and it was towards the back of the magazine, it was upside down. And I mean, they got honest letters. Hey, you guys need to talk to your publisher. They printed stuff upside down. And, it lampooned everybody and everything in hang gliding, and it was just absolutely hilarious, We had mornings we get together in the morning and have breakfast and go up there in Pork's dungeon and start clicking the keys, and we'd be holding our guts doubled up on the floor, just laughing our butts off, and so apparently Gil didn't think some of that stuff was very funny. he felt a little offended by some of it. I don't know if it was the picture of me with a hat and the big nose and the glasses at the keyboard. He's a pianist, a really good pianist. And so it was a little offended. So they didn't want to do it again. So my sister confronted us, and we did our own hang diving with a yellow cover with George Worthington. His letter to the editor. Dear editor, that was the best letter by George that I, George, have ever seen about George. George B. Fossilton, with a shaky signature.
And then pet names like Dennis Pagan was Dent's Pages.
Yeah. And oh my God, the list is.
I was Thom Pigsweenie. I always had pet names for everyone. And I didn't hook in at Torrey Pines, and he had my Thom Pigsweenie and the Free Fallers with their new hit, The Gravitational Boogie.
Nice, yeah.
That's how he recorded it, and just had nice pet names for everybody.
Nobody escaped it.
Yes, you gotta lampoon everybody.
And if you knew, you'd have the same thing with the World Cup. They do it a little bit with X Magazine on the last page.
The World Cup, WHIRLED, not the W. And then the centerfold with Mr. Bill goes hang diving. We had made a Mr. Bill doll and a little toy hang glider, and I'm getting drilled by the rotor, and there's a 1/4-inch drill bit coming into the picture, ending up in a crater with Sluggo trying to give him a rotor noogie. It's just too much fun.
Brilliant. You've mentioned music a few times. You're a musician.
I have been known to do that. When I stopped flying in this hang gliding, really dedicated in the late 70s, I ended up in a 5-piece country western band, and that was very fun. You'd be surprised how many beer stinking honky tonks there are in San Diego, dude. In the East County, it gets pretty cowboy out there. It did back in those days. And from there, I played in the bluegrass band in the late 80s. I started playing bluegrass, and that got disinterested in those same 3 gigs at the same 3 places every year, and started a little coffee house trio, and we played for close to 10 years, myself, another guy on electric guitar, and a gal who played bass and sang, and we did that every weekend for a very long time. That was most fun ever.
Okay, we're gonna talk debauchery. Go for it.
I get a call one day, and it's like, "Hey, Bill, this is Steve Wilson up here at IPER." Yeah, hey, Steve, what's up? Hey, Kronk's out of town, and we got some factory-built Quicksilvers that need to be flight tested. Could you come up here and fly them for us, test fly them so we can deliver them? Like, sure. He says, yeah, and we'll update your glider to the latest specs, put the latest cool stuff on it. I'm like, sure, let's do it. So I get up there, up to Torrance Beach at about 7:38. It was really early. Dan Fitzgerald was working there, and he was the kid. I still am in touch with him. And I come into the shop, and there's all the people who work there. You know who they were. Their pupils are really small. Do you have pupils in there? What's going on? And everybody was tripping their brains out. And I was like, oh, everybody's tripping. This is going to be an interesting day. They they loaded up all the stuff on their truck, and somebody drove us out there, and they weren't tripping. And I flew off, scared all the hell out of all the peacocks. But it was just stuff like that. And they'd come down and party with us in San Diego. We went to Reggie Jones's one time, and Dave Mule had sent all these UPS boxes to Reggie's house. And we get there and open up, it's all fireworks. It was like, didn't know you could do that. Damn. And we get about this many fireworks, for New Year's. And, a lot of those guys are Vietnam vets, So like about 10 minutes to midnight, the pop bottle rocket war started out front on the street, and it was epic. All I can is epic. And it's amazing we didn't burn down Lemon Grove that night. My God. There's some cool guys. So it was a lot of fun partying with those guys. And Jack Schroeder, Give us a Jack Schroeder impersonation there, Tom.
I had just won the Kitty Hawk meet and then went out to Frankfort, Michigan and won that meet on consecutive weekends. And I was really a little punk kid. And he said, "Listen, you little frickin' dirtbag, we're going to take you out to Telluride, but if you win that, I want to strangle you, blank. Just effing strangle you. Fucking dirtbag." Yeah, pardon.
Jack Schroeder. Some characters. Yeah, Bob Trampano, when I was flying model airplanes and I built them, I really got into that quite a bit. I get a call. I had this Michael Selig model airplane airfoil, his thesis, published it. And God, it was just, these airfoils he developed and Bob Trampano was just, has really wanted to use those airfoils on his hang gliders. So I get phone calls. "Hi, Bill. It's Bob Trampano. How you doing?" "Hi, Bob. What's up?" "Well, I was wondering if you still have that book around." He's hours. Bob, I'll never forget going up to his place and going in the bathroom, and there was one of those B. Claban books. Never read anything bigger than your head.
Terrible.
Oh yeah, there's
Selling,
yeah.
Selling.
SD airfoil.
Yeah,
Sweet.
making a little hand launch glider. Still use the same book I have in the basement, but anyway.
So in the bathroom at Trampano's house is the B. Claban book. I should drag that one out someday. And there's really never eat anything bigger than your head. He did the cats, the real famous, very expressive cats. And there's one is all these cavemen sitting around. There's a little fire and, rocks and stuff around. And one guy is just throwing his spear down and he's walking away. And the caption for the thing is, "Fuck this primitive shit." And that was like the shop motto at Seed Wings, And high performance at Dave Cronk's office, there was one, I think over the door it said Dr. They had the Flexi flyer. Over the door it said Dr. Flexi Jerkoff. And then, on his desk was Gyro Gear Loose. You remember that Disney character? Yeah. Oh, God.
Gotta love whack jobs.
Some real whack jobs out there. Thank God I'm excluded, right?
Bill, I asked Malcolm this, and the answer was fantastic. So I got to ask you the same thing. If you could rewind the clock back to your 50-hour self, whatever that was, teen somewhere, I imagine. But you could magically transport yourself back to that Bill and give him some advice, knowing what you know now. What would it be?
Yeah, maybe look into that advice of knowing when to keep your mouth shut.
This is a good life one, not necessarily flying.
Yeah.
That's a good life one.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to say, "Don't eat those reds."
Be real careful of that handful of pills. Yeah. And, roll down the windows in the van before they let you in. Yeah. No, I as far as my flying goes, I do think just being very cautious and, not trying to be at the bleeding edge of it.
Don't be Chuck Yeager.
Survival skills, just real personal survival skills, Keep doing that, Bill. That would be my advice, It's a good attitude, don't go first, As we were flying with Al Adams, one of the old timers down in San Diego, helped me learn to fly Tory. He was 20 years older than me. And we were at some place we'd bushwhacked. We were just driving around on a Santa Ana day, always a good day to fly. Check out a new place.
Ripping out towards
no, don't do that. Don't do that. Some advice there. And we found one place, and Al called it "You Go First Ridge." Nobody flew it. It looked good. Looked really good.
Smart. Bill, your movie is incredible. It's so
Thank
awesome.
you.
I'm so glad you made it. The entire community, I'm sure, is, because it's classic and it has it all. It's all there. And I'm so thankful to all the people who took the footage that you were able to assemble so beautifully that tells such a poignant,
Thank you.
amazing story. Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
Tom, thank you for making this happen. This is precious as always. I really appreciate you both. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, for me,
Very well.
doing Big Blue Sky it's the story of the spirit of man.
It certainly
You
is.
know, the working title for the movie was Dreams Come True.
Yeah.
You know, and it really is the story.
Yeah.
You know, we had a dream, and this is how we pursued it, and we achieved it.
You certainly did. It's incredible.
At some cost.
At some cost. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Those
Sadly.
things that are worth it are. Well done, boys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and this has been a real pleasure. I've just gotten a lot more wrinkles in my life, and I'm smiling so much the last little over an hour. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.